So you've got all these different systems, your mobile app, your website, even your company's accounting software. How do they actually talk to Salesforce? Well, that magic happens through something called an API. In this explainer, we are going to pull back the curtain and demystify all of that, focusing on the two main characters you'll meet in the Salesforce world, REST and SOAP. Here's a quick look at our game plan. We're going to start with the basics, what an API even is. Then we'll dive into the Salesforce API universe. After that, we'll get to know our two main players, REST and SOAP, see how they stack up, and finish off with some key tips so you can totally ace your next technical interview. All right, let's kick things off with the big one. What in the world is an API? The easiest way to think about it is as a bridge. It's this digital bridge that lets two completely different pieces of software have a conversation. I mean, think about it. You use tons of different apps every single day. How do they all seem to work together? When you order food and a map just pops up, or your travel app shows you the weather, how does that happen? Yep, you guessed it. 9 times out of 10, the answer is an API working behind the scenes. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. It's really just a set of rules, a protocol, that lets one system ask for information and another system respond. The API is that bridge that makes sure the conversation happens in a way both sides can understand and that it all happens securely. Okay, so that's APIs in general. But what about in the Salesforce world? Well, here, APIs aren't just important, they're absolutely critical. They're basically the glue that holds your entire business together, letting all your other software talk directly to your Salesforce org. So what can you actually do with a Salesforce API? Well, pretty much anything you can do when you're logged into Salesforce yourself, but you're doing it from another system. You can create a brand new lead, you can update an opportunity, you can pull a whole list of contacts, or even delete old records, all programmatically. Now, Salesforce has a whole bunch of different APIs for different jobs, but for today, we're going to zero in on the two heavyweights. These are the ones you're going to hear about and work with most of the time. They are, of course, the REST API and the SOAP API. Let's start with the crowd favorite, REST. It stands for Representational State Transfer, but don't worry too much about that. What you need to know is that REST is the modern, flexible, and pretty much the go-to choice for almost any new project these days. The beauty of REST is its simplicity. It just uses the same stuff your web browser uses every day, HTTP methods. So you use GET to read data, POST to create it, and so on. And the data itself is sent in a format called JSON, which is just incredibly lightweight, super easy for humans to read, and really, really fast for computers to work with. So a typical REST interaction is a pretty clean 4-step dance. First, the application has to connect securely, usually using something called OAuth. Then it just sends a request to a specific web address or endpoint. Salesforce gets that request, does its magic, and then sends back a nice, neat little package of JSON data. That's it. Simple and fast. And that simplicity is exactly why everyone loves REST. It's a widely adopted standard, so developers everywhere already know how to use it. It's lightweight, which means it performs way faster. And that makes it absolutely perfect for the kind of fast, responsive web and mobile apps we all use today. Okay, now let's meet our other contender, SOAP. That stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. And if REST is the cool, modern startup developer, you can think of SOAP as the traditional, highly structured enterprise architect, complete with a suit and tie. SOAP is a whole different ballgame. It's all about strict standards. The data format it uses is XML, which is a lot more detailed and structured than JSON. But the most crucial piece of the puzzle here is something called a WSDL. Think of the WSDL as a formal, non-negotiable contract that spells out exactly how the two systems have to talk to each other. And that formality really shows in how it works. The very first thing an application has to do is get that WSDL contract. Only then can it build a request that follows those strict XML rules. And when Salesforce gets the request, it checks it against the WSDL to make sure it's valid before it even touches it. Then it sends back an equally structured XML response. So you might be thinking, wow, that sounds really complicated. And it is. But in some cases, that strict WSDL contract is actually a massive advantage. It guarantees reliability and has strong built-in error handling. That makes SOAP perfect for huge enterprise-level systems where you just can't afford any mistakes. Okay, so we've met our two APIs. Now for the main event. The showdown. Let's put them side by side so you can really get a feel for which one you should be choosing for your projects. Let's break it right down. On one side, you've got REST, using that lightweight JSON format. It's fast, it's simple, and it's built for modern apps. On the other side, you've got SOAP with its more detailed XML. It's a bit slower, definitely more complex, but it brings that rock-solid WSDL contract, making it the choice for big, demanding enterprise jobs. But what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, the numbers here are pretty shocking. In Salesforce projects today, REST is being used about 90% of the time. 90%. That huge shift really happened because the explosion of web and mobile apps just demanded the kind of speed and flexibility that REST is perfect for. So, to make it crystal clear, you're going to choose the REST API when you're building integrations that need to be in real time, when you're making a mobile app or a web app, or really any time your top priority is just fast, lightweight communication. Honestly, for the vast majority of new projects, REST is going to be your default answer. So, when does SOAP get its moment to shine? Well, you'll want to use the SOAP API when you're plugging into large, maybe older enterprise systems that already speak SOAP. It's also the right call when having that strict, formal contract is an absolute, non-negotiable requirement for the project. All right, let's bring this all home. We're going to wrap up by boiling all this down into the key things you need to know to sound like an absolute pro in your next technical interview. Here's your cheat sheet. First, know that REST is the top choice for almost everything new, while SOAP is the specialist you call for legacy systems. Mention that authentication is usually handled by OAuth. You can think of that like a valet key for your data. It gives apps permission to do specific things without you ever handing over your master password. And if you really want to impress, talk about planning for Salesforce's API governor limits, which are like traffic rules to keep the platform fast for everybody, and how you'd use asynchronous processing to handle huge amounts of data without getting stuck in traffic. And that really brings us to our final thought. With REST now dominating about 90% of new projects, it really makes you wonder, is SOAP's time running out? Or will its strengths in the enterprise world mean it'll always have a place in the Salesforce universe? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining this explainer.